Plenty of conversations, comments, and concerns in the days since the Knox County School District banned the Pulitzer Prize-winning novel Roots. That decision came last week to pull the book from library shelves, a move many educators and historians say doesn't factor in its historical and cultural significance. Under state law, school librarians are required to review books flagged as potentially inappropriate for students. We continue to follow this developing story, and earlier today I spoke with Jesse Mayshark from the online news publication Compass Knox about the facts surrounding the decision, the fallout, and what comes next for Knox County schools as this debate over banned books continues. Jesse Mayshark from Compass Knox, it's good to see you. Thank you for making time to be with us today.
Yeah, happy to. Great to see you too.
This is a talker, what we're getting ready to dig into. You were the first to report on Knox County pulling the great literary work Roots from the famed author Alex Haley off library shelves.
Yeah.
Okay, first off, how did you find out about this? And number two, what was your reaction?
Well, you know, I've covered schools in Knox County on and off for a long time, so I know a lot of people in and around the system. And when you know people in and around the system, sometimes you hear things from people. So I had heard about this, and I'd been paying attention to books being pulled off Knox County school library shelves for the last few years, ever since this law passed, written about it a few times. And I got a note that, well, here's the latest batch, and Roots is on this list. So I contacted the school system to verify this, and they said, yes, in fact, that has happened. And it was bubbling around on social media, and so you kind of know how this goes as a reporter. I very quickly put something up on really just the Compass Facebook page to kind of say, if you've heard about this, yes, this has happened. Here's the confirmation, and we'll have more information on this. And it very quickly spiraled from there. I mean, everybody, and I wasn't surprised that so many people paid attention to it, because we have had, there were already more than 100 books that have been removed from Knox County shelves. But Roots is a particular book. I mean, it's not just a book, it's a cultural touchstone because of the really popular miniseries that it was made into in the late 1970s.
I watched. I mean, that was like must-see TV that, you know, even my parents encouraged, hey, we're going to watch this.
Yeah, I mean,
and I was 11.
I think more than half the households in America at the time watched Roots, which is just like astounding if you think about our current media landscape, that anything could generate that kind of audience. And I think it means a lot to a lot of people. And then, of course, we have the resonance of it here in Knox County and Knoxville with Alex Haley's presence here over the years, the fact that we have a statue and a plaza dedicated to him. His papers are at the University of Tennessee. I mean, I think this would be a big story anywhere, but the fact that it's in Knox County, I think, gave it really some extra impact.
You guys had a lot of interactions, if you will, on that social. I know when I was listening to a podcast, your podcast for Compass Knox, that you had said thousands of interactions.
Yeah, which is, for us, that's a lot. We're a pretty small local news organization, and we were getting feedback from people all over the country. And I have to say that the overwhelming, I mean, I'm going to say 90+% of the people who responded in any way or shared it were concerned about it. They were upset that this had happened.
Specifically, what is it that was taken to task, if you will, that was pointed to as this is not appropriate?
I think that, so interestingly, according to the school system, Roots had been submitted before, a passage from Roots had been submitted before to this district review committee that they have, which is the committee that considers books under this state law, which we can talk about in a minute maybe. And so somebody had flagged a passage in Roots previously and submitted it for review, saying that it maybe violated one of the categories in the state law. The first time, the review committee said, no, it doesn't. We think it's fine. So then there was a second submission, and this was a depiction of a rape of an enslaved woman by a slave owner, because Roots is it's not only about slavery. It follows a family from slavery, then through the next 100, 200 years of their family's life in the United States. But its depictions of slavery are very vivid and in some cases explicit about the kinds of abuse that went on, which, I mean, that's just history, right. And that was, I think, part of the impact of Roots at the time that it came out. And when the miniseries came out, it did kind of force people to see and acknowledge what had been part of this whole system of human enslavement. So yeah, it was just like one page in this book that has a fairly graphic, not at all. I mean, this is not a passage that was written to be in any way provocative or anything like that. It was written to show the brutality of the system. And the review committee, based on the criteria they're given by the state, had to look at that and say, well, this does meet the definition of sadomasochistic abuse, which is one of the 4 or 5 categories that this law spells out, that if you find something depicts or describes sadomasochistic abuse in a book, then that book's not appropriate for any student at any grade level, K through 12. And so they removed it.
Let's talk more about the law that went into effect. Was it 2 or 3 years ago?
It was initial. So it's the Age Appropriate Materials Act, state law. It was initially passed in 2022 out of some concerns about, are there inappropriate materials on school library shelves? And then in 2024, they amended it. And that's really when the law was given some teeth and these specific definitions of these categories. And so if you have any work that shows a depiction of nudity, first of all, sort of any depiction of nudity. It doesn't even have to be...
Like even a health book?
Yes, yeah, and there have been health books removed as a result of this law. There have been children's books that, like In the Night Kitchen by Maurice Sendak, which is a classic, popular children's book. There's one image on one page of that where a little boy is falling through the air and his pajamas come off, and so, like... he's naked in this one scene, but it's kind of a cartoonish little drawing, but that book got removed. And then in terms of text descriptions, anything that describes sexual conduct or activity, excess violence, which is not really defined, and it's kind of hard to know exactly where that line is, and then sadomasochistic abuse. If any of those things are present in any work, regardless of why they're there, regardless of the context, the background, then libraries are supposed to remove them.
And there really is no differentiation when it comes to age either.
Yeah, that's a major change in this law, because before this law passed, it's not like we didn't have regulations on what was appropriate for schools. There were processes laid out in state law and local policy. There were ways that people could challenge. If they thought a book in a school library was inappropriate for that grade level, they could challenge it. It would go through a hearing, could ultimately come to the school board. But those decisions were made on an age-appropriate level. Now, this law, even though it's called the Age-Appropriate Materials Law, it emphatically refuses to differentiate between age levels, and so it says all grades K through 12. And what that functionally means is that really, for anything to be theoretically appropriate to be in a school library, it would have to be appropriate for a 5-year-old. Because if you're saying you have to treat everybody the same, then you kind of have to go to what's the lowest age range we're dealing with. And I don't think there's anybody who works in education anywhere who would say that what's appropriate for a 5-year-old and what's appropriate for a 17 or 18-year-old are the same at all.
They're worlds apart.
Yeah,
let's
completely.
face it. 5 to 17. There's a lot of life between the two. And there's no way to pinpoint, at least in Knox County, who is bringing this up for discussion or is flagging it, right?
Yeah, and that's another change. It used to be if somebody challenged a book, that was a matter of public record. They might even have to come to a public meeting to explain why they were offended by something. Under this law, well, the law itself does not actually say anything about this as far as I can tell. I'm not a lawyer, but I've read this law many times. There's nothing in it that says that complaints have to be anonymous, but the way Knox County chose to set up its system, there are multiple pathways that materials can be referred to this committee. The first is through school librarians who are charged by the law with reviewing their collections, looking for things that might be in conflict with it, and if they find anything, sending it to this committee. But students and parents can also submit materials to the committee for review, and so can any school employee, not just a librarian. So it can be a teacher, it could be a custodian, could be somebody in the cafeteria, anybody who works in the school system. And what I've heard from school officials is that they want to especially protect school librarians. So if a librarian is flagging something, maybe not even because they themselves are offended by it, but because they have been told that, well, you have to look for these things, they don't want people to target the librarians, and that's understandable. But the effect of it is it gives a tremendous amount of power to anybody, whether it's a librarian, a teacher, a parent, a student, and let's say you just don't like some particular book. Like in this case, somebody submitted, or maybe it was two people, we don't know, but somebody submitted Roots twice for review, which kind of makes it seem like maybe somebody was really trying to get rid of this book in particular. And so if somebody has an issue with a particular book or material, they can just kind of go through it and look for one line, one picture, one anything, and say, oh, this violates this particular part of this law, put it in for review. And the school system says they're not keeping any records of that. And so that, I think there's always a balance between anonymity, confidentiality, security, all of those things. But in this case, it's just giving a lot of power to any one anonymous person.
Knox County School Board wanting to delve into this a little further. As a matter of fact, board member Ann Templeton, we spoke to her for a story that we aired yesterday, and she wants to bring up the discussion for the broader concerns about how books are reviewed and removed under state law. John Becker and I were talking about this yesterday, and he'd reached out to a school board member to see how much you have heard from the public, and the answer was a lot.
Yeah.
A lot. So clearly they recognize there needs to be a broader discussion.
Yeah, and I think, they maybe felt a little bit broadsided by it because, again, these decisions, the way this process is set up in Knox County, they don't come to the board. They don't even necessarily hear about them. Like the review committee makes its determinations, and if they identify some books to remove, they send that notice to their librarians and say, okay, you need to take these books off the shelves. As far as I know, there is not any official notification that goes to board members. That may be one thing that the board members are going to ask for is like, when you do this, please let us know. Because I think some of them found out about it at the same time everybody else did. But then beyond that, the school board could have a greater role here. The law actually contemplates the involvement of the school board, but then it also says that school systems can, if they want, set up their own systems, which is what Knox County has done. So if the board wants to give itself a role here to be involved in the consideration, it looks to me like there's ways that they could do that. Even without changing the law, they could just, change their policy and say, we want to have some level of board discussion or knowledge when this happens.
Is there a situation in which they make those changes, if you will, that they could then bring a book back to
Well,
shelves?
and that's very much an open question. Again, from reading the law, there's nothing in it that forbids that I can tell. There's nothing that says once it's gone for good. It just doesn't refer to any sort of review or appeal or reinstatement process at all, and neither does Knox County's policy. And so I think that's one thing the board's going to look at. Again, without having to, I think some of the things that Templeton is concerned about in terms of being able to consider, say, the broader context of a work and those kinds of things, those would require changes to state law, and I think that may be one thing they're going to talk to their legislators about. But I think there's also some things the board can do probably without having to change the law, just changing their own policies, including maybe having some sort of appeal and reinstatement process, because they don't have one right now. And again, like I said, as far as I can tell, there's nothing that says they can't.
You mentioned this, and to go along with what you're saying, every county has their own way of doing it. And as you mentioned, Nashville, Memphis, those respective counties have not banned any books.
Yeah, when the law was first passed, I saw there were reporters in Nashville and Memphis who reached out to their school boards or their superintendents, and they were basically told, we looked at it, we think we're fine. And I haven't been able to find that there's been any revisiting of that. A lot of the school systems right around us have not actually removed very many books. Knox County has removed more than most in the state. It's about 124 is the total titles pulled. There's been some counties, Wilson County, Rutherford County, they have removed more. It's really on a very county by county basis, which tells you that, people are I think in some cases struggling to interpret exactly what kinds of materials are being, the state wants them to take out. And then some of them are just choosing to be reactive, kind of sitting back to wait and see if somebody raises an issue with a particular book. So even though the law is pretty restrictive and it's specific in those categories, it lays out, there's obviously an awful lot of discretion that's being used by different school boards around the state. One thing that I do think is worth knowing is that the cumulative effect of all this is that Tennessee is now the number 3 book banner in the country between Texas and Florida. Texas and Florida have by far removed the most books over the last 5 years, but those are also much bigger states than Tennessee. On a per capita basis, Tennessee is probably right up there in terms of how many books we are removing, and that's really just being driven by librarians, school officials across the state trying to understand this law.
Well, this is a story that will continue to produce more chapters, and we know you'll be following it. We will as well. So, Jesse Mayshark, we appreciate your time and, of course, your insight in explaining this story and where it may lead us. So, thank you.
Happy to be here.